In this video, we'll delve into the African origins of the Greek myth, Hercules, and exploring how Greek storytellers adapted an African hero into their pantheon, and how ancient evidence continues to point back to Africa as the true source of some of the most iconic figures in Greek mythology. According to ancient historians like Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, the original Heracles was not Greek, but Egyptian. Herodotus made it clear that the earliest Heracles came from Egypt, while Diodorus went even further, portraying him as a black man of extraordinary feats, performing legendary labors, taming wild beasts, building cities, digging canals, and establishing laws, roles far beyond those of a mere mythic strongman. Herodotus also added that both of Heracles' parents, Amphitryon and Alcmene, were of Egyptian descent, with both he and his lineage described as black. According to Greek myth, Heracles' ancestors include Andromeda, the Ethiopian princess, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Andromeda is known for her radiant dark skin and as the most beautiful woman in the world. Roman poet Ovid even emphasized her blackness, solidifying her African identity in the classical antiquity. Andromeda married the Egyptian Perseus, and from that line came Heracles' mortal parents, Amphitryon and Alcmene. That means Heracles carried both Egyptian and Ethiopian royal blood, two black dynasties united in one legendary figure. In the epics of Homer, he describes Heracles in his godlike appearance, quote, "I saw the mighty Heracles, for he is feasting ever with the immortal gods. He looked black as night with his bare bow in his hands and his arrow on the string, glaring around as though ever on the point of taking aim." Rashad Poe in his book, Black Spark, White Fire, Did African Explorers Civilize Ancient Europe? He writes, "We of course have no way of knowing to what extent the Heracles of legend represents a real person, but even if he does not, his portrayal as an African prince, part Egyptian and part Ethiopian, suggests that the ancient storytellers held a profoundly different view of Bronze Age Greece than that served up by Hollywood scriptwriters. Rightly or wrongly, ancient tradition places African dynasts at the head of some of Greece's most powerful and prominent cities. It also portrays Heracles as an ambitious hydraulic engineer, responsible for damming rivers and digging canals all over Greece, an occupation peculiarly appropriate for a prince of an Egyptian royal dynasty. Herodotus connects the Greek myth of Heracles to the ancient Egyptian god Shu, a cosmic deity of great strength who held up the sky with his bare hands. He stands as the pillar between earth and the heavens. Shu embodied the raw physical power and divine endurance that later myths would attribute to Heracles. Several Greek historians highlight that the Greeks borrowed many of their myths from Egypt, later the Greeks rewriting them into distorted or exaggerated versions. In some cases, characters like Heracles and even Perseus are reimagined as violent figures who attack women while establishing patriarchal values. Diodorus Siculus explains that the Egyptians reject such Greek customs and values. In one version of the Hercules story created by the Greeks, Herodotus highlights a ritual involving the human sacrifice of Hercules to Zeus. He exposes the Greeks as ignorant and poorly informed. Quote, "It seems to me that by this story the Greeks show themselves altogether ignorant of the character and customs of the Egyptians, for how should they sacrifice men when they are forbidden to sacrifice even beasts, except swine and bulls and bull calves if they are unblemished, and geese, and furthermore, as Heracles was alone, and still only a man as they say, how is it natural that he should kill many myriads? In talking so much about this, may I keep the goodwill of gods and heroes." End quote. In truth, the legend of Hercules did not begin with the Greeks. It was born in the heart of ancient Africa. Long before Greek reinterpretations, this mighty hero was honored in Egypt as a symbol of strength, courage, and divinity. The Greeks later adopted and altered his story, like many other stories, reshaping it through their own lens. But at its root, the origin of these myths is African.
Some scholars have alleged that European civilization had its origin in Africa, and that's a whole other subject. I don't know if we're going to get into that as much, but there's a theory which I explore that civilization began in Egypt, and that to a great extent what we call Western civilization, which arose in Greece, was directly influenced by the Egyptians, not only through Greeks studying in Egyptian temples and so forth, but perhaps even through direct colonization of Greece. So what I would be referring to in the title is the black spark of Egyptian and African civilization sparking the fire or the conflagration of European civilization, or Western civilization, as it's called.
Well, let's get into that. That's a very good starting point. Now,
Okay.
conventional wisdom among conventional historians and scholars is that Egypt is, in essence, not a part of Africa, and that, in effect, and I have read directly this, that Egyptians were white. Would you comment on those 2 points?
Well, sure. You know, the Egyptians, by any normally accepted American definition of the word, were certainly black. I don't think you'll find, in fact, any expert who's really studied the issue who disagree with it. That's the interesting thing about it. To the average person, there's a big controversy over whether the Egyptians were black. But I was in a debate, for instance, with Mary Lefkowitz. Now, she wrote a book called Not Out of Africa, in which she purported to debunk supposedly all the Afrocentric claims, and she's always held up as the Bible of the anti-Afrocentrists. Now, I debated her on the Armstrong-Williams show, and I asked her directly, and Armstrong asked her directly, were the Egyptians black? And she actually admitted that they were.